Broadcasting from the studios of AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota, and airing on WCPTA 20, Chicago's Progressive Talk. Welcome to The Gaily Show, the only daily LGBTQ radio news and talk show in the United States. I'm your host, John Parker. We are also streaming live on our YouTube channel right now. And when we're not streaming, you can check out all of our videos on YouTube. We've created curated playlists for you of episodes such as all of our interviews with Minneapolis mayoral candidates and ahead of the election next Tuesday, or all of our author interviews, wink, wink, for today's episode, for you to find a queer book, literally hours of progressive news and talk there. So if you're watching right now, click subscribe, click that like button, and then leave us a comment. All right, I also want to acknowledge there's a lot happening in the news today, and coming up after us, we've got the best in progressive news and talk. We've got the Matt McNeil Show on AM 950 Radio in Minneapolis, and we've got Choose Views on WCPT 820 in Chicago. For us today, it is the week that we take a step back from the headlines, and an expert guest joins me to unpack a particular issue or issues facing the LGBTQ and allied community. My guest today is Bill Hulseman. Bill is actually returning to the show because I didn't get to ask all of my questions when we talked to Bill a few weeks ago. And there's still a lot to unpack, wink, wink, from his new book, 6 to Carry the Casket and 1 to Say the Mass. As a refresher, Bill is a ritual designer and wedding officiant. He also worked as a middle school principal, program director, and campus minister. He earned a master's degree in education leadership from Columbia University, and he also holds degrees in religious studies from Fairfield University and Harvard Divinity School. He lives in Seattle with his husband. 6 to Carry the Casket and 1 to Say the Mass is his first book. Welcome back to The Gaily Show, Bill.
I'm so happy to be back.
All right, let's pick up our conversation around using identity as a tool, not a fixed label. And this was something we started to get into in our conversation. And it's one that comes up a lot right now. Like on one side of the conversation, we have folks that are like, don't label me, you're boxing me in with all of these labels. And then we see other people who don't want to accept the reality of sexuality and that there are lots of different variations on the rainbow spectrum, if you will, not just straight and gay. And so they will mock the acronym LGBTQIA. And we've even got Democratic think tanks out there now on another side of the conversation that are saying all the acronyms are threatening winning elections in America. So stop saying them all together. So unpack for me, because I loved how you were framing this in our first conversation about using identity as a tool, but not using them as fixed labels.
Yeah, I think of identity as a tool, something that serves us, right, to help us create our identity. We're handed a set of tools when we're born. Some of them we find useful, some of them we don't find useful. And so some tools we can put down and some we can keep using. And sometimes we have to keep looking for other tools. And I think identity is like that. We're born into a set of affinities, a set of interests, a set of abilities or capacities or commonalities with other people. And sometimes those are satisfying for our lives. And sometimes we search out different ways to know ourselves and different ways to know others because we've got something inside us telling us like, oh no, this is not me. I need to find my people. If anybody's ever had that itch of like, oh, I got to find my people. Like I am not, that in its way is a search for an expanded identity. It's a search for new tools. I think what we're seeing now is a clash of not identities, but is a clash of worldviews and the identities have become, targets and also weapons in that clash. This is something I go back to my days in divinity school, and one of my professors, Diana Eck, who was one of the great proponents of pluralism and looking at religious diversity as a way to understand different attitudes toward difference, different attitudes toward diversity. And she characterized, religious attitudes, attitudes toward religious diversity. She kind of categorized 3 buckets, exclusivist, inclusivist, and pluralist. The exclusivists are the ones who say, no way but my way, or my way but the highway. Wait, what's the phrase? Yeah. Or in the ancient Catholic phrase, no salvation outside the church. That's a strict exclusivist attitude to say there's only one right way to do it. And then there's the inclusivist camp, which is, I think, where the majority of people really find themselves. And that's, you want to be including, but it's a fine line of, inclusion can be a good thing, but then at a certain point, you're not necessarily seeing people on their own terms. So, inclusivity or inclusion is a form of projection. Is to say, like, okay, you're cool, but as long as you're using my language, as long as I understand what's going on, or as long as you're entering my space, then it's cool. And then there's the pluralist camp, which is, probably as small as the exclusivist camp. But those are the folks who don't say there's one right way to do it. There's not necessarily one right, one wrong. It's a matter of figuring out, what is your truth for you? What is my truth for me? And how can we coexist? So in a religious context, yeah. So the exclusivist camp is that, like, my religion is the only way to save myself and to save the world. Inclusion is like, oh, everybody's welcome, but I'm staying here. Please come to my place and we'll be fine. And pluralism is more like, all right, anybody can go anywhere. Everybody should be welcome, or, respect our boundaries or whatever. Anyway, I think what we're seeing now is kind of a clash between these. I think we've been really comfortable in the inclusive space. We've been really comfortable thinking it's fine as long as everybody's working on my terms. Well, when we've got how many millions of people living in this country, everybody's got a different set of terms. So if we're constantly fighting or negotiating, wait, whose language are we using, or whose rules are we following, then we're never going to get to a place of, peace and satisfaction with each other. Where the harder work is on the pluralist side, because you have to figure out, all right, every day is a compromise. Every day is negotiating what's important to you, what's important to me, and what common space can we establish, or do we just need to clear away from each other? I find myself working hard to be in the pluralist camp. And that's born of my own experience of religion. That's born of my own experience of sexual identity. And so I start to see other conflicts of identity, in this light. And for me, it's easier to kind of parse it out. Like, okay, they're exclusivists. We've got people who are, they've taken the reins for our government. They've taken the reins at both local and national levels, and they've got an exclusivist agenda. But I think the vast majority are more in the inclusivist camp. And then there are lots of us who are like, why are we fighting over one or the other? Shouldn't we be all compromising? Shouldn't we all be looking at what is our common space and where can we give each other space? So that's how I'm approaching the current moment.
Right. And I see how you're getting there. I think, and I'm not going to devil's advocate. I'm going to me advocate there, because it's something that I'm wrestling with a lot right now. I'm not quite sure where I would fit in those three camps, because I see a movement happening, the MAGA movement, and I'm going to say this on. Okay, I'm just going to super personalize this right now. Like, I am estranged from, like, both sides of my family, because they would have a very exclusivist mindset. On the one side, they're, Armenian, and they're basically like, you can't be queer and, Armenian, because you will, those two things don't go together. So you have to pick a side. And then my other side of the family, the American side of the family, is very, similarly like evangelical MAGA Christian, that version, more the Christian nationalism side of things, which is, you are either this or you're out. Yeah. Right. And for me, I'm like, okay, I can sit there and go, fine, religion can be your version, your interpretation of Christianity, whether it's the Armenian one or if it's the American one. Fine, go do you. there, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to try to impinge on that unless you start to come for me. And that's where it starts to get like, okay, how can, either through your book or through the practice of reflection, which you talk a lot about, and the value of that in your book, how do we begin to reconcile for, like, even myself, where I'm like, I'm fine with your personal choice, but how do I live alongside someone who's actively coming at me? Yeah. I know that's a tricky question. I know we're not going to answer it in an hour, but your initial thoughts on that.
I think on this level, the biggest deficit that we experience culturally is around empathy.
Mhm.
I don't know why people don't cultivate empathy. And this is true for people across the spectrum in any kind of category of identity. There are people who just cannot believe that somebody else's experience of the world is real. They cannot believe that somebody else who's born in a different place and time and has different eyes to navigate the world, that they see things differently. That to me is empathy, and that's something that has to be cultivated. That isn't something that's natural. It's not a natural animal instinct to be empathetic and to seek understanding and to approach with compassion. That doesn't feel very survival of the fittest. But of course I don't believe that survival of the fittest is really the dominant narrative in creation, but that's me. So I think it's about a lack of empathy. It's about understanding and not understanding that other people have different experiences and not imposing on them the language of your experience. I think one of the worst things that I could do to you is tell you that your experience is wrong. Like, no, that's not, we call it gaslighting now, but I think it's much deeper than what we, gaslighting in a flippant kind of sense. It's, really understanding, who are you? Where did you come from? If I experience a conflict with you, it's taken a long time for me to get to a point to say, okay, the starting point for our relationship is not conflict. The starting point is going to be, let's ask better questions about each other and figure out who each other are before we lock horns.
I love that. And I have to fit in a break here. We're talking with Bill Hulseman and his new book, 6 to Carry the Casket and 1 to Say the Mass. Before we take that break, I want to share about our travel partner, Travel Marquette. And the reason why is that Marquette, Michigan is a very special place for me. I've been going there every year for the past decade. And I want to let you know, because I love going there because I don't have to worry about traveling while queer in Marquette County. And coming up this November is the Stand Up Comedy Festival, which will be at the Ordock Brewing Company, November 5th through the 8th, 4-day festival. And then also there's the magic of the holiday season with a laser show every weekend at the Lower Harbor Ore Dock. You can find out more information at travelmarquette.com. That's travelmarquette.com. Follow me on Blue Sky and DM me, and I'll gladly tell you all the great places to go in Marquette. You're listening to The Gailey Show. More after this break. Welcome back to The Gailey Show. I'm John Parker. We are coming up on the bottom of the hour. This is our weekly episode we call Unpack This For Me, where we sit down with an expert guest to take a deep dive into an issue facing the LGBTQ and allied community. My guest today is Bill Hulseman. He is a writer, ritual designer, and former educator whose work explores identity, belonging, and personal agency. His new book, 6 to Carry the Casket and 1 to Say the Mass, asks the question, what does it mean to carve out space for oneself in a world that often seeks to define us? Bill, before the break, you were talking about the challenges of empathy for some folks and the invalidation of other people's experiences. And I kind of want to, if I may, sort of shift gears into your description of reflection as practice and how we may utilize that to address developing empathy for ourselves, for other people.
Sure. Let's talk about it. I love reflection. I it's one of those things that as a tool, as a skill, I just thought everybody loved to reflect as a kid. I loved I loved going to church and listening to a homily, because it was like, oh, we all heard that text and now this guy is talking about it from this angle. Isn't that interesting? I think at the dinner table, my parents were very conversational. And it wasn't just chatter, it wasn't just gossip about the day, it was making meaning of the day's experiences. I grew up surrounded by that. That's one of the reasons I think I was really interested in religion as a course, in school. But, I went to Catholic schools, so religion was always a piece of it. I always loved those classes because they were the only classes that were truly interdisciplinary, and it made me look around, instead of just diving deep into one lane. It made me look across the lanes and see like, oh, that's interesting. Like we can be in conversation between ethics and science and anthropology and philosophy, so it all, literature, history, art, all sort of informs that conversation. And reflection is that process of taking the pieces from all these different experiences and figuring out, okay, well, what does that tell me about myself? What does that tell me about others? What does that tell me about the world? What does that tell me about the universe and the nature of things? You can extrapolate to any level you want. But I was introduced to tools of reflection, to processes of reflection really early. And so it always felt very natural to me. And when I was teaching, it was also one of the most exciting things is to offer those tools to students and watch the ways that something would go off, a connection was made in their brain, the synapses were firing and they're like, oh my God, now I understand that text or that experience that I had. And then they're able to apply it to them. They were able to apply it to their life and make different choices because of that reflective process. I think it's an underappreciated instrument, reflection. It's an underappreciated process because it's so powerful. It helps us step out of the things that are blocking our vision, whether that's social media and like everything that we're being hammered with from different directions, information and images and ideas. Reflection is to engage in reflection is to carve out that space and say, okay, pause on the rest of the input. I'm going to make sense out of this and figure out what do I need to pay attention to moving forward. So it's helped me, reflection being so deeply baked into my bones. It helps me navigate social media alone because it's like, oh, okay, I don't have to pay attention to that. I know how, I've been able to kind of carve out, okay, what do I need to pay attention to? That's not just true for social media. I think that's true for any realm that we're interacting with people in. How do we take the reins on our own relationships? How do we take the reins on the way that we navigate the world? Reflection is one path toward that.
I'm here with Bill Hulseman, whose new book, 6 to Carry the Casket and 1 to Save the Mass, is out now. Bill, can you give us an example of a tool that you use that folks, listeners, or our viewers on YouTube could start using today?
Oh, sure. One of the things that I applied in my teaching was something that I learned from a professor in grad school. I was in divinity school, and my professor, Kimberly Patton, who was also my advisor, she had an approach in all of her classes and all of her coursework that her students would always do a reflection every week. And when she started teaching, she realized that even these students at an elite university did not know how to reflect. It was not something that they ever learned in grade school, high school, college, and then they end up at Harvard and they don't know how to reflect. So she had this really great simple structure, and every week we did this like no more than at least 1 page, no more than 2 pages. So concise, but not minimal, right? And it was 3 parts. The first part, we had to summarize whatever it is we were doing. If we were reading something, if we were watching something, if we were observing something, it was a quick, pithy summary of what's important and what do we need to know. The second part was analysis. Pick one piece of that and dive deep. Either open it up, unpack it, or do some research around it, like what's the origins, what's the background, so some form of deep dive on one aspect of it. Not going all over the place, really. It takes some discipline to just focus on, okay, one stream here. And then the third part is the synthesis. And that is looking at what the summary, looking at that piece that you've dived deep into. And now how does that apply to you? Like, does that relate to some experience that I have had? Does that relate to something else I've read and I make a connection there? Does it speak to a behavior or an idea or an opinion or a belief? So those are the 3 kind of components of reflection that I learned from Professor Patton. And it's a really kind of quick method, right? If you're overwhelmed by something, you don't know how to make sense of something. It's like, okay, summarize, analyze, synthesize. Summarize. What just happened? What did I experience? What do I need to remember? What do I need to pay attention to? Analyze. what is standing out, what's speaking to me, what is rattling my bones right now, or what set something on fire in me that's got me so excited or passionate about this. And then 3, what do I have to contribute to this? How does this relate to something I've experienced in the past? How does this impact what I believe now, how I'm going to act in the future? I integrated that method into my teaching. All of my writing for my students, I chucked the 5-paragraph essay out the window, and I had my patent method, the 3-paragraph or the 3-part reflection, because that's what I wanted my students to hone in. Other courses, they were focusing on more literary structure and how to write coherently and do the 5-paragraph essay that we all learned. But for my students, for the stuff that we were doing, I needed them to have that personal connection. I needed them to be able to dive deeply into something. And that's a key skill. Sometimes we think, oh, we know all the information, that's enough. No, we have to process it. We have to dive deep into it and relate to it to be able to use it and for it to serve us.
We are talking with Bill Hulseman, whose new book, 6 to Carry the Casket and 1 to Say the Mass, is out now. I have to fit in another break. If you like what you're seeing, click subscribe on YouTube. Give us a like, leave a comment. If you're listening to us on the radio, none of this is possible without our generous advertisers and sponsors. Do business with them. Tell them you heard about them on The Gailey Show on AM 950 Radio or WCPT, Chicago's Progressive Talk. Coming to you from the studios of AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota, and airing on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk. Welcome back to The Gailey Show. We are 33 minutes after the hour. I'm John Parker. We're also streaming on our YouTube channel right now. When we're not streaming, you can check out all of our episodes on YouTube. We have curated playlists for you, author interviews, politics, talk, anything that you want there. It is on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@thegailey-show. It is our weekly Unpack This For Me episode, where an expert guest joins us for the hour to unpack a particular issue or issues related to the LGBTQ and allied community. With me today is Bill Hulseman. Bill is returning to the show. You can check out his first interview with us on that playlist that I talked about there, wink, wink, on YouTube. Why am I winking all the time in today's episode? I have no idea what's going on. But there was so much to unpack from our first conversation that I've invited him to join us again for this special episode. As a reminder, Bill is a ritual designer and wedding officiant. He has worked as a middle school principal, program director, and campus minister. He holds degrees in education leadership, religious studies from Columbia University, Fairfield University, Harvard Divinity School. His new book is 6 to Carry the Casket and 1 to Say the Mass. So also in the book, and thank you for, before the break, unpacking for us that reflection piece. It was a really lovely part of the first part of your book, and I really enjoyed that. So thank you for sharing that, for unpacking that with us here today. Something that I did want to talk to you about that we didn't get to talk about last time is how Dan Savage ruined your life. Can you unpack that for us?
And I'm so glad he did. Dan Savage, of course, is the writer, columnist. He writes about sex and relationships, and he's been a leader, especially in kind of progressive voices around talking about sex and sexuality. I think it must have been around 2010, 2011. There was a spike in suicides by queer teenagers, and in response, Dan Savage and his husband Terry started the It Gets Better project. They wanted to collect videos from queer people who were celebrities, recognizable, to be able to send the message to kids like, it gets better. You might be locked away, isolated in your bedroom right now, but we're going to get this video to these kids. That was their mission, to say it gets better. And it was wildly successful. They got a lot of people volunteering videos. within a couple of years, the president of the United States was sending a message to queer kids that it gets better. I mean, thanks, Obama. So it was just an incredible project. So Dan was speaking about the It Gets Better project at the National Association of Independent Schools conference in, I want to say 2012, 2013. And it was my first time ever in Seattle. So interesting foreshadowing. I come to Seattle for a conference, and then a little over a decade later, I landed here. Dan told the story about the project and then started fielding questions. And his response to one particular question just rocked me. So let me step back for a second. I grew up Catholic. I was a religious studies major. I was involved in retreats and liturgies. And my first job out of divinity school was teaching world religions and working as a campus minister at this little Catholic girls' high school outside of Boston. And it was a wonderful job. I loved it. And it was an inclusive school. It was very, very progressive, wonderful place. There's something about women's institutions in the church, too, that are always a little bit more inclusive, a little bit more, I would say, community-oriented in a particularly just kind of way. So I loved working at this school, and it was never an issue that I was gay. I was out to my colleagues. I was accidentally out to my students because a student caught me making out with my boyfriend on the subway one day. And it never was an issue. And she in the hall a couple days later, I was like, "Hey, how was your weekend?" And she said, "It's all good. It's all good." I was like, "Okay, that's my sign from this kid that like is not going to cause trouble for me." Now, a couple years later, I was talking to another student who had been friends with her. It's like, "Hey, have you heard from her? How's she doing? Did she ever tell you a story about me?" And she said, "I don't know what you're talking about. On the train? Yeah, everybody knows that." I was like, "Oh, okay." But it was further evidence to me that it wasn't gonna be, a death knell to me. I thought, oh my God, now I'm never gonna work in Catholic schools again. Oh. So I had this. So I thought I was in a really safe place. I loved my work. I loved my students. I loved my colleagues, and I was really passionate about the mission of the school. I really saw myself dedicating my career in Catholic schools. I really wanted, and I saw it, particularly bringing a queer lens. I thought maybe this is my opportunity to move the needle ever so slightly for my students. If nothing else, for the things that I taught or the ways that I developed these programs or I interact with them, if anything else, they had a gay campus minister, which I think of as a middle finger to the Catholic patriarchy. So this was my life, and I was really dedicated to it. I moved to another Catholic girls' school, again, another sponsored by a women's order, another inclusive and wonderful, safe place. It was a little bit more conservative context, though, because it was in Washington, D.C., which is Catholic-wise a little bit more conservative. And I started to become more aware of pushback. There were certain families you couldn't say things in front of because they would then cause trouble. And the burden for queer teachers for anybody working in Catholic schools, queer folks working in Catholic schools, the burden is that it's not just your job is on the line. The whole school is on the line. So if a family didn't like me for some reason, they could open an investigation and figure out, why was this homosexual hired at this Catholic school? And but for order schools, which are not under the governance of the local diocese, it's harsher because if a parent complained, they would complain to the diocese would complain to the Vatican would complain to the order, and then the order would be expected to come down on the school. So it's not just, oh my God, my job is on the line. It's the whole school is on the line every time I walk in. Now, I was okay with that. I was comfortable with that because of the work that I was doing, because I felt I was doing good things. I felt like I was doing good things for me and for my students. And then I went to Seattle. And there I am listening to Dan Savage, and he started answering questions from the audience. And somebody got up and said that they were reading a question from somebody else who couldn't stand up and ask a question without risking her job. And everybody in the room clutched their pearls. Like, could you imagine working at a place like that? Oh my! Except for those of us from religious schools, and we were like, oh, yeah, that sounds familiar. Yeah. So she proceeded with the question, and it was something like, I'm a queer educator. I'm here because I want to be present to my queer students. I want to let them know that somebody's, I'm a presence to them. So I want to let them know that they're safe and that's going to be okay. What advice would you give to someone in my shoes? And he took a minute, he cocked his head. I'll never forget, like, just the way that he cocked his head and he said, "You're not going to like my response." And his advice was to get her resume in order, because he said, you think that your presence there is sending a message of you're safe, it's okay, it's going to be okay. But what you're really sending, the message you're really sending is that it's okay to leave part of yourself at the door on the way into work in the morning. And I had never seen it like that. I never thought about it like that. Every day because I was aware that it wasn't just my job on the line, but it was the whole school community that could be rocked if somebody wanted to make trouble around me. And I had said that was okay, but I hadn't seen it quite from that light. And that was the moment that Dan Savage ruined my life. Now, I burst into tears, and my boss was sitting next to me, and she said, "Oh, we're going to have to talk about this, aren't we?" I said, yeah, we're going to have to talk about this. Yeah. And that really set the course for me to leave Catholic schools. It took a little while because I really had to discern. I didn't want to just make a flip decision. I was like, I'm not just going to do everything Dan Savage tells me to do. His advice is usually pretty good, but I'm not going to just up and leave my work because Dan Savage told me to. But he planted a seed, and I kept coming back to it, and I started looking at my work. I worked with my boss to be able to move out of a role where I felt like I was still functioning kind of as a campus minister. I was leading a social service program. I needed to get out of that. I needed not to be the face of the church for my students. That I couldn't deal with anymore. I felt so complicit in all of the bad stuff, and it was also at the time when state by state, equal marriage was coming. It was leading up to 2015, state by state, people were finding access to marriage that they hadn't had before. But with the other side of that is that suddenly your sexual orientation is a matter of public record. Like, once you get married, you are on record as being married to a other person who is of whatever gender. And so there were witch hunts. Every time a state would go equal marriage, then within the year, there would be this rash of firings from religious institutions. And true in Catholic schools, true in other religious schools, other religious denominations.
What?
Yeah, because as religious institutions, you're not subject to the same regulations of other, things like employment law. So it's a religious exemption. So every time the state went equal marriage, there would be a rash of firings. And this was the reality for educators working in Catholic schools. All of that was in my mind, as Dan Savage's, seed was planted. That all stood out to me so horrifically. I thought, okay, I'm part of an unjust institution right now. I can't do this anymore. And so I took my time to make sure that I was making the right decision for me. And I got a job in a not Catholic school, in an Episcopal school. And it was like, it doesn't sound that far away, but you know what? The first thing I did when I moved into my office, it was about a month before school started, and my predecessor had moved out, and I'd cleaned up his stuff, and I was ready to unpack my office and start my new job and my new life on the West Coast. And the first thing that I could do was put up a safe space poster in my office. It was something I could never do in a Catholic school. Even working in these progressive, inclusive places, I couldn't put up a safe space poster. That tiny little signifier to kids to say, like, it's okay to be you in this room. Like, how did I make it through how many years as an educator? And I thought that was okay, that I couldn't send a message of like, you're safe here.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a really powerful moment for me. So when I talk about, I tell the story in greater detail and talk about my experience working as a teacher and an administrator in Catholic schools. And I talk about it in the book. But that moment that Dan Savage ruined my life, I'm really grateful. I'm really, really grateful because it set me on a path, it wasn't just a professional path that he redirected for me. It also opened a door for a whole personal reinvention. because I'm like Madonna a lot of ways, so I like to reinvent myself, every so often. And he really opens the door for me to reinvent myself. It wasn't just a matter of geography and picking up and moving to another coast, another city. For me, it was a matter of, okay, what are the things that shaped me? What do I want to hold on to? What do I need to let go of because it landed me in this place where I was complicit with an unjust institution. And in a couple of years, I was burned out. What landed me in this place of burnout? I wanted to understand like what I needed to let go of and what I wanted to hold on to be the person that I felt called to be, that I felt would be happy making for me, that would be right for me to live.
Bill Hulseman, author of 6 to Carry the Casket and 1 to Say the Mass, is here with us sharing about his book. This particular chapter, Damn Savage Ruined My Life, is particularly poignant. So I wanted to ask you about that, and I'm glad that you shared that story here. The part 3, so the book is organized into 3 parts. The third part, of which Dan Savage is a part of, is about all the different parts of media, rather, that informed who you are as an individual today. And I'm coming up on another break here, but there's a couple of them that I want to ask you about because they are also dear and near to my heart as well. So we are going to take that break. Before we do, check out our GLAAD Media Award nominated podcast, That's Queer Book Saved My Life. I interview LGBTQ authors from across the rainbow about the guests, rather. I interview LGBTQ guests from across the rainbow about the queer books that had a life-saving impact from them. Plus, we bring in the authors to have join the conversation. So you can stream This Queer Book Saved My Life everywhere you get your podcast or listen at thisqueerbook.com. You can also follow us on Blue Sky at thisqueerbook.com. More after this break. Welcome back to the Gailey Show. I'm John Parker. We are coming up on the top of the hour. It is our weekly Unpack This For Me episode. Our guest today is Bill Hulseman, writer, ritual designer, and former educator, whose new book, 6 to Carry the Casket and 1 to Say the Mass, is out now. Bill, in part 3 of your book, you're talking about various pop culture media, not necessarily pop culture media, that shaped who you are today. And I would like to talk about designing women.
Yes!
I was a kid, but Julia Sugar Baker was my queen, always my favorite character on that episode. And so much so that even decades later, she's really the only one that I remember from that show. And what streamer is it? Has the show, the series on there. And I started watching a few episodes and I was like, oh yeah, Jean Smart was in this too. And I started didn't care. I was like, where's Julia? Give me Julia. And I didn't remember, because I was probably like 8 or 9, the speech that you talk about in your piece there about when the lights went out in Georgia. But I went and looked it up in preparation for our conversation, and it just the chills, the shivers, listening to her give that speech. And then there's another scene that you talk about where they are working with a client who has AIDS and dealing with a religious bigot, I guess one might say. I would say, I don't know if I'm putting words in your mouth on that or words on your pen. But talk to me about designing women.
Oh, I mean, it's one of those things that when people laugh off pop culture, they will laugh off sitcoms. It's like, it's a sitcom. It's not important. It's so important because it introduces, a sitcom has the potential to introduce really complex, very pertinent, very real, very pressing situations with characters that you get to know and that can relate. So it's like, I can see how these people navigate that issue. And, most of the time it's light and it's fun, it's relationship conflicts, friendship, workplace conflicts, whatever. Designing Women was so good about bringing in really, really pressing social topics. I think it reflects the priorities of the creator of the show, Linda Bloodworth Thomason, who was always very politically engaged and very clear about her point of view with her shows. And very famously, Dixie Carter and Linda Bloodworth Thomason were not on the same page politically. So when Dixie Carter as Julia Sugarbaker delivers these diatribes, these wonderful monologues, it's not Dixie Carter. It's the venom. The acting is all Dixie Carter, but the venom is all Linda Bloodworth Thomason. And so I think both of the things that you pointed to, the first one of the lights going out, and the night the lights went out in Georgia, that was one of the early takedowns, and it sort of set the tone and it set the bar for what to expect from Julia in later episodes. And it was all in defense. It wasn't just because she was pissed off about something. She was pissed off because somebody hurt somebody that she loved, right? So she was defending her baby sister, who up to that point in the show was totally vacuous. She was a former beauty pageant. She'd been married several times. And, so that was kind of a running joke in the show. But once in a while, you'd see Julia just kind of reach out her wing and kind of protect her baby sister. And this was one of those great moments. And so she stumbles into the ladies' room and hears these other beauty pageants making fun of Suzanne. And then she has this glorious moment. Now, I can tell, if you've ever been in a gay bar when this has been projected, when this is playing, like on a video clip night or whatever, and I describe it in the book, in this essay about designing women, about my friend Adnan and I in Palm Springs. And he had never seen that clip of the show before. He knew of Designing Women. He certainly didn't know that they were going to be playing Designing Women clips in a gay bar in Palm Springs when we were there for very different reasons. But sure enough, I just found myself reciting along with it with everybody else. And he looked at me like, well, where did that come from? I'm like, how do you not know this? You're a homosexual of a certain age. So... And by the end of it, and not everybody has it down perfect, but when you get to the last few lines, everybody had it right. And everybody had that intonation right. And, and that, Marjorie, just so you will know, and your children will someday know. I'm not going to do the whole thing. But it was wonderful. And that was one of those moments where I realized, like, just stumbling into this bar full of strangers, here's something that we all had in common. And here is somebody who is defending all of us. And we all needed Julia in our corner as kids. And, it was, for me as a kid, knowing that there were hateful people out in the world. You see enough of them in the news and in daily life.
Mm-hmm.
And then to see Julia and to know that, okay, there are people like Julia too. Like, she is going to have my back. So it was one of those moments that made me look at those pop culture moments as almost scripture, in the sense of they're revealing something to us about ourselves and about each other, and it's tying us together, and it's something that we go back to. The show hasn't been on for how many decades, and we're still watching it, still going back to it. Yeah, I'm glad Hulu is, and I'm sure there are other streamers that are
Hulu.
But I go back to, I drop in and watch the Designing Women once in a while between my marathons of the Golden Girls and Murder, She Wrote. But the other diatribe that you talk about later in the show, a young Tony Goldwyn was playing this young designer who had AIDS, and he hired the women to design his funeral. But more than that, and this is a nugget that's lost in the show, it wasn't just about designing his funeral. He wanted them to make over this funeral home so that all these other people who were dying had a beautiful place for their family and friends to gather. And that was a very harsh reality of the time.
I've got just under a minute. So we're going to have to put that on hold. But folks, if you go to YouTube, or if you're already there right now, and just search for Julia Sugarbaker Marjorie and then Julia Sugarbaker AIDS, then you will get these clips and you can watch them, and they're absolutely spectacular. The book is 6 to Carry the Casket and 1 to Say the Mass. We have links in our show notes for you to get your own copy. You can connect with Bill at billhulseman.com. He's also Bill Hulseman Rituals on Facebook and Instagram. He also has a Substack. he does all the things. Thank you, Bill. I'm so glad we had this more time to talk, and I knew we weren't going to have enough time. But thank you again for joining us. And for folks on WCPTA 20, Choose Views with Richard Chu is up next on AM 950 Radio. It's the Matt McNeil Show. And until this time tomorrow, keep it queer, America.